So the line is that I'm a dictator, but I stop crime. So a lot of people say, you know, if that's the case, I'd rather have a dictator. But I'm not a dictator. I just know how to stop crime.
How will people feel sending their kids to school, going to church, opening their shops with a military presence on our streets?
This is Today as It Happened. Good Tuesday evening to you. I'm Holly Furfer here with your chronological look at the biggest events and stories of the day. From President Donald Trump holding a cabinet meeting at the White House to new partisan efforts at redrawing congressional maps in red states. But first, this morning, our correspondent in Tel Aviv gave us a look at the nationwide protests across Israel, demanding an end to the war in Gaza and the release of hostages taken by Hamas.
Today is a day of resistance, calling the Israeli government to seal the deal that's now on the table and to bring all the hostages home and to end the war in Gaza. The majority of the Israeli people want the end of the suffering of the hostages and the people in Gaza. We're calling also upon the leader of the world, the leaders of the free world, and President Trump to help us end this terrible tragedy.
In Israel, a nationwide day of protests as thousands take to the streets, calling for the release of the remaining hostages held in Gaza and a negotiated end to the war. Demonstrators carried signs and banners and voiced their opposition to the ongoing war, calling for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, President Trump, and other world leaders to put an end to that fighting. Scripps News international correspondent Blake Sifton is in Tel Aviv for us with the latest. And Blake, can you tell us about the protests that have been underway across Israel today?
Good morning, Holly. Well, family members of the protests held captive in Gaza, as well as their supporters, have been holding protests across the country today. They're demanding that the government reach a ceasefire, as well as abandon their plans for the seizure and occupation of Gaza City, because they are worried that that offensive will see harm come to their loved ones. And they agree with Chief of Staff of the Israeli military, Eyal Zamir, who is reported to have told the government there is a deal on the table and we need to take it. There is grave danger to the hostages' lives if we proceed with conquering Gaza. Now, these protests today began with organizers unfurling a very large Israeli flag with the photos of the hostages on it on the beach here in Tel Aviv across from the American embassy. Of course, they've been urging President Trump to do everything he can to help win the release of the hostages. Protesters then blocked highways along the coast as well as between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. And they also held demonstrations in front of the homes of ministers in Netanyahu's government. More protests are expected throughout the day, and it's all expected to culminate here in Tel Aviv tonight with another massive protest. Organizers say some 500,000 people attended the last nighttime protest that capped off the previous day of action on August 17th.
President Trump, you stated yesterday that you believe in 2-3 weeks we will conclude this episode. We pray to God that this is correct, and you put a deadline in front of the Prime Minister to make sure that this is the end. You have committed to us, hostage families, when meeting us, that you will bring all of them back home. Now is the time to step up and make it happen, even before the destruction of Hamas.
All right, Scripps News international correspondent Blake Sifton in Tel Aviv for us. Thank you for that update. In the news this morning, a judge has ordered the Utah legislature to redraw that state's congressional boundaries. District Court Judge Diana Gibson says Utah's current map is illegal. The decision was not made according to partisan politics. She says lawmakers created it after ignoring an independent commission established by voters to prevent partisan gerrymandering. Those new maps will have to be redrawn before candidates start filing in January for the 2026 midterm elections. And look at these amazing pictures from Phoenix, Arizona yesterday. A massive dust storm covered the city, causing power outages and flight cancellations. Visibility was near zero at times as wind whipped the desert dust at upwards of 70 miles an hour. The phenomenon is called a haboob and was immediately followed by a severe thunderstorm that left thousands without power, mostly in Maricopa County. And you still have a chance to be a multi-millionaire. Yep, we're saying there's still a chance. Nobody won last night's Powerball drawing. Nobody since May 31st. So that means the jackpot's rolling over again and will near $815 million before Wednesday's drawing. Now, it's likely to be the 7th largest in the lottery's history. The cash value of that payout, if taken in a lump sum, would be about $368 million. But that's surely to rise between now and Wednesday, so good luck. I'll see you in line at the gas station. Coming up on Today As It Happened.
Marco has been really, I think you're born for this job. I don't think you should ever run for another office. I don't think you should, really. You're so good at this. He is so good, and everybody likes him.
Welcome back to Today As It Happened. Let's check back in on our daily briefing of the day's top stories. President Trump is holding his monthly cabinet meeting, so let's listen in.
Are you all set? You all ready? Nice group. Big group. But I want to thank you all for being here as we prepare to celebrate Labor Day, when we honor the incredible hardworking men and women of our country, which is doing very well, I have to tell you. Every policy of the Trump administration is designed to lift up the American worker, promote great-paying blue-collar jobs, and to rebuild the industrial bedrock of our nation. It's also obviously for great defense. We have the greatest military in the world. We rebuilt it largely in my first term. Some of it was stupidly given away to Afghanistan. For what reason? Nobody can figure that one. But it was still a relatively small amount of what, if you compare. The concept of what they did, however, is just incredible. But the country is doing well. We're respected all over the world like never before, probably. We went to NATO, as you know, and they went from 2% to 5% of GDP. Nobody expected that. And the difference is they didn't pay the 2 and they paid the 5. So. And as you know, we are selling a tremendous amount of equipment to NATO. We're not spending any money, we're making money, but I don't want to talk about making. I want to talk about we're no longer involved with funding Ukraine, but we are involved with trying to stop the war and the killing in Ukraine. So we're selling missiles and military equipment, millions and millions, and ultimately billions of dollars to the NATO people, where I'm very friendly and we have a great relationship, but that was an amazing trip. So they're funding the entire war. We're not funding anything. I think it's an important point to make, because a lot of people don't understand that. I saw this poor, stupid Chuck Schumer, the guy. He looks like he's aged 100 years, and I don't like getting into looks. Looks don't mean anything, right? When you're in politics, looks don't matter. I look at Pam, I would never say she's beautiful, because that'd be the end of my political career. Laurie, secretary. But I will tell you, this is the best of all. And they're going to fight me. Like this slob of a governor you have in Illinois. This poor guy got thrown out of his business by his family. I know the family. I was partners with the family. Nice family. I like the family, but he was no good. They threw him out. He's governor of Illinois, and he goes about Trump, we don't need his help. Chicago is the worst. These places are really bad. Crime in D.C. was the worst it ever was. They make up stories. Crime in D.C. was the worst ever in history. And now, over the last 13 days, we've worked so hard, and we've taken so many, there are many left, but we've taken so many criminals, over 1,000. I watched a man from Maryland who said to me, sir, you're the greatest president. You're doing an unbelievable job. What a great job. Governor Moore, has anyone heard of him? He's another hopeful for president. I don't think so. But I met him, and I didn't realize it was on camera. Did you see they caught him on camera? I was at a game, I don't know, like the Army-Navy game or something, and I met him in a hallway. And as usual, you do your job very well. One of these great cameramen had it on tape. But I met this gentleman, I never met him before. Sir, you're doing a great job. You're doing an unbelievable job. Thank you very much. But then he goes on television and says, oh, Trump is a dictator. He's a dictator. And a lot of people have so the line is that I'm a dictator, but I stop crime. So a lot of people say, you know, if that's the case, I'd rather have a dictator. But I'm not a dictator. I just know how to stop crime. And you would think that Illinois would have such a problem with crime, such a bad governor. He should be calling me, and he should be saying, could you send over the troops, please? It's out of control.
Well, the GLP-1 weight loss pill is one step closer to approval. Drug maker Eli Lilly said the pill was successful in the last round of phase 3 trials. Participants in the latest trial with obesity and type 2 diabetes lost an average of nearly 23 pounds while using the drug. The completion of this trial means Eli Lilly now has the full clinical data package required to start global regulatory submissions. And Cracker Barrel says it could have done a better job when redesigning its logo. The company says the things people love most about the chain aren't going anywhere, like its rocking chairs and gift shop. The simplified logo features only the store's name, dropping the image of an older man in overalls leaning against a barrel and removing the words Old Country Store. And investigators in Washington state are intensifying their search for Travis Decker, the man accused of murdering his 3 daughters near a campground 3 months ago. The county sheriff is working with federal and state partners in what he described as a, quote, painstaking and difficult task. Authorities say they have not had any breaks in the case, and they cannot confirm whether Decker is still alive. A number of roads, trails, and campgrounds have been closed while investigators continue their search.
Coming up on Today as It Happened, Indiana lawmakers visited the White House today as Republicans in the state consider redrawing their congressional maps. Will Hoosiers follow in Texas' footsteps? Stay with us for congressional correspondent Nathaniel Reed's reporting after the break. Watching Today as It Happened, Scripps News rundown of the biggest events and stories of the day. So let's jump right in.
A federal judge tossing out a Trump administration lawsuit that named all 15 Maryland federal judges. Early this year, the Justice Department sued them after the court's chief judge put in place a rule that automatically and temporarily blocked immigration detainees from the country if the detainee had appeared in court to challenge the removal order. The federal judge who President Trump had appointed wrote a blistering rebuke saying the administration was smearing the justice system. And take a look at this video from the United States Coast Guard showing the apprehension of a suspected drug smuggler and their cargo off the coast of Florida on Monday. It's just one instance of the effort the Coast Guard has put in place to prevent the drugs from getting to the U.S. These drugs are part of a recent haul that included more than 61,000 pounds of cocaine and 14,000 pounds of marijuana worth an estimated $473 million. In total, drugs from 19 different interceptions in the eastern Pacific Ocean and Caribbean Sea between June 22nd and August 18th were turned over to authorities. And you had the Jordans, the Kobe's, Shaq's dunk man, and now Caitlin Clark will join the best of the best athletes with her own logo. The WNBA superstar has fans a sneak peek of her logo in partnership with Nike. The short video shows a vehicle driving down a highway at sunset carrying large boards with interlocking C's on them. The post included a nod to a signature product dropping in 2026. The reveal marks the WNBA star's official introduction as a Nike signature athlete. And a group of Republican lawmakers from Indiana is scheduled to visit the White House today to discuss redistricting. Today's meeting comes as the White House pressures GOP-led states to redraw maps before the 2026 midterm elections. President Trump is hoping Republicans will increase their slight majority in the House. Scripps News congressional correspondent is at the White House. Nate Reed, I should say, is at the White House to tell us about what is at stake here. So, Nate, I think this was supposed to get underway at some point this afternoon. Any updates?
Well, we do understand that it is underway, but I mean, mum is the word here on the White House campus. So far, a White House assistant press secretary telling us that they will not confirm or deny that these meetings are taking place. We've been kind of keeping an eye on the Eisenhower Executive Office building, which is kind of one of the typical venues for these types of meetings, to see if we could notice any Indiana state lawmakers coming in or out. Candidly, Andrew, I'm not the best gauge of what the Indiana state Republican lawmaker looks like, but at the same time, we have not heard much yet from the White House. But the implicit reason for them coming to the White House today is to talk about redistricting. There are, mostly Republican seats in the ruby red state of Indiana, state that gave us former Vice President Mike Pence, a state that, regularly elects Republicans to the U.S. Senate and to Congress. But there are 2 Democratic seats in the state of Indiana that are regularly elected in elections and certainly would be, quite useful for Democrats in the midterm elections. That led earlier this month the Vice President, J.D. Vance, to go to the state of Indiana, have a conversation with the governor, Mike Braun, a former Republican senator himself, along with state lawmakers to try and at least begin to talk about what redistricting could look like in Indiana. Earlier this morning, Democrats in that state holding a press conference at Indianapolis Airport, basically taunting Republicans for making these changes, listing a number of possible legal complaints that they could have, and also saying that what Republicans are doing, is not the right thing for the people of Indiana. Take a listen.
They're trying to undo Indiana elections just to hand Trump 2 more Republican seats. A rigged 9-0. Not because voters ask for it, but because they're scared of what happens when voters catch on. Let's be honest. This isn't redistricting. This is rigging. This is cheating.
And Andrew, to be clear, the midterm elections typically benefit the party out of power, meaning that this could certainly be a pickup opportunity for Democrats, especially given that House Speaker Mike Johnson has frequently told us reporters that this is the slimmest Republican majority in American history. For that reason, Republicans will do anything to try and hold on to that majority. The governor of Indiana, Mike Braun, had previously told reporters that he believes the White House is going to try and do this in every possible state that they could potentially conduct redistricting. Again, a lot more questions than answers about whether Indiana lawmakers will go along with what the White House wants them to do, whether they'll give up those 2 blue Democratic seats, risk any legal exposure for doing so, and furthermore, whether Democrats will retaliate in any meaningful way in many of the other states across the country where this could be a possibility. But to be clear, Andrew, there are very few competitive districts anymore. Republicans trying to, kind of stack the ballot, trying to make these seats more friendly to Republicans, just means that there'll be fewer moderate kind of races to watch, toss-up races, if you will, in the midterm elections than what we've seen even in the 2022 midterm elections and the 2024 general election.
Yeah, and Nate, I think you bring up an interesting point there, because I think if you watch what happened in Texas in recent weeks, the impression would be that Republican state legislators, state lawmakers across the country are eager and willing to go along with this White House-led plan to redistrict or carve up some of their congressional districts. But for these Indiana lawmakers, have we sensed some potential hesitancy over this idea of going through this process, the same process that we saw obviously play out in Texas in a very high-profile way?
Yeah, there is a lot of reported hesitancy. And again, it's a state-by-state dynamic. In Texas, you could see Republican lawmakers did not seem to have many qualms about redistricting mid-cycle, something that typically only happens once every 10 years in conjunction with the census and reapportionment, which is when they determine how many seats go to each individual state. You might remember this last time around, some red states picked up additional seats. Some blue states like New York lost a seat because of changing population distribution in the United States. Florida has been one that has grown exponentially. Arizona, another state to watch in terms of growth. Montana has grown as well. So again, these censuses really do have real-world effects. What lawmakers are now being asked to do by the White House, and in some cases being egged on to do, if we're talking about Democratic legislatures, is try and redraw these lines in a way that's favorable to their party outside of that normal 10-year window where this happens. So again, Indiana lawmakers appeared to be somewhat hesitant about this possibility, but who knows what happens in this meeting. President Trump is in his own cabinet meeting. This is hour 3, I believe, of the president's cabinet meeting. So if he was planning on stopping by this Indiana Republican lawmaker meeting, it seems like he's got dwindling time to do so. A lot of questions about what that cell is looking like inside that room. Again, the White House not confirming that this meeting is taking place, but we do know from the Scripps News Group that these lawmakers are here in D.C. today and are expected to be having this meeting, which was supposed to start at 1 p.m. Eastern Time.
All right, a busy day at the White House and major implications for the midterms and potentially beyond. Congressional correspondent Nate Reed for us. Nate, thank you.
Coming up on Today as It Happened.
An Israeli airstrike killed at least 20 people, including 5 journalists, on Monday at a hospital in the Gaza Strip, impacting coverage of the war. I'm Maya Rodriguez in Washington. Coming up, we take a look at what Gaza's journalists are facing to bring news from a war zone to the rest of the world.
No, she seems to have had an infraction, and she can't have an infraction, especially that infraction, because she's in charge of, if you think about it, mortgages, and we need people that are 100% above board, and it doesn't seem like she was.
Welcome back to Today as It Happened. I'm Holly Furfer, here with your daily rundown of today's top stories.
The lawyer for the Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook says he will be filing a lawsuit to challenge President Trump's attempt to remove her from the central bank. Attorney Abby Lowell saying today that the president has no authority to fire Cook, and the reason Trump provided for the firing was not true. Our deputy political director, Joe St. George, explains this complicated story and one that could shake up the market.
Can he or can't he? President Trump is attempting to oust Lisa Cook as a member of the Federal Reserve over accusations of mortgage fraud. While she is denying any wrongdoing, the question now is, how will the courts roll? And will the president further escalate his attacks on the Fed? Lisa Cook is an American economist who has been a member of the Federal Reserve since former President Joe Biden nominated her in 2022. She is the first African-American woman to serve on the board. In recent days, Trump has accused Cook of engaging in mortgage fraud, which is the basis for this rare firing of a Federal Reserve member. In a letter posted on Truth Social late Monday, the president wrote, "The Federal Reserve Act provides that you may be removed at my discretion for cause. I have determined that there is sufficient cause to remove you from your position." The president went on to say, "You signed one document attesting that a property in Michigan would be your primary residence for the next year. 2 weeks later, you signed another document for a property in Georgia stating that it would be your primary residence for the next year. It is inconceivable that you were not aware of your first commitment," the president wrote. The Federal Reserve Act of 1913 does not allow a president to remove a member of the Fed over disagreements regarding monetary policy, but there is an exception for cause, which the president is attempting to invoke here. The president's latest firing is his latest action targeting the country's central bank. He has bashed Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell for months for not lowering interest rates, and has criticized Powell in person for his handling of a construction project meant to refurbish the Fed's main building in our nation's capital. In a statement, Lisa Cook is vowing not to resign, to continue her work at the Federal Reserve, believing that the president has no authority to fire her. The Federal Reserve doesn't meet again to discuss interest rates until September. It's likely we'll have a bit more legal clarity by then. If the president is allowed to fire Cook, he will likely replace her with someone who shares his economic philosophy regarding cutting interest rates. Joe St. George, Scripps News Group, Washington.
Israelis are holding a nationwide day of protest. Demonstrators are calling for the release of the remaining hostages held in Gaza and a negotiated end to the war. They say they want Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, President Trump, and other world leaders to put an end to the fighting. National correspondent Alex Miller spoke with the family of one of the remaining hostages. Alex, let's start with the demonstrations. We know that Netanyahu has been a bit impervious to pressure from outside and inside his country. Are they making any difference today?
Well, the families are hoping so. They really have not spoken to Netanyahu themselves. I actually asked Ruby Khan about this. His son Itai is one of the American IDF soldiers who passed away on October 7th, who was murdered on October 7th, I should say, and whose body is still being held. They have not really had a window into Netanyahu himself, and so this is the way that they are protesting. They've been doing it every single week since October 7th. It has really ratcheted up over the last few weeks. Last week had some 2 million people in the streets. Today as well, they are calling this the day of disruption. They have flooded the streets around the country, particularly in Tel Aviv, taking over highways, sometimes lighting tires on fire, trying to get attention, trying to get the prime minister's attention to make a deal. Now, what that deal would look like is really still the big question here. Right now, there is a deal on the table that would allow for roughly half the hostages to be brought home. There are 50 hostages still being held in Gaza. About 20 of them are alive. All 50 families obviously fighting to bring their loved ones home. And they had been fighting for an all or nothing deal. But now this deal that is on the table right now with the Qataris says that only half of them would be brought home. I asked Ruby Khan about this. Listen to what he had to say.
Like a sick reality show. Who is the most humanitarian hostage after almost 2 years? And it pits families against one or the other. There's a lot of friction because of that. And again, I'm not blaming the families. It is sad to see that the Prime Minister of Israel is moving forward with his decision to supersede the objective of destruction of Hamas. And he will be sacrificing 50 hostages. Maybe by dismantling Hamas, he might get hostages out, but that is a bet that he is taking that nobody knows for sure if it'll play out.
And Andrew Khan compared Netanyahu to President Nixon, who he says tried to stay in power by prolonging the Vietnam War. He says Netanyahu essentially doing the same here, and the support among the Israeli public really dwindling for the war in its current iteration. Looking at this polling that just came out, let's talk first about the Israeli public as a whole. They say that they want to see a hostage deal and an end to the war. That's 74% of Israelis saying that they support an end to the war as part of a hostage deal. When you look at the soldiers specifically, the ones on the ground, now we know that more soldiers being called back up. Increasingly, they are believing that this war is being driven by political motive. And one of the more indicative polls, I thought, is this next one, looking at the parties. Let's look specifically at the Likud party. The Israeli government looks different than the way ours is set up. It's a bunch of smaller coalition that form the ruling party, essentially, the ruling government. And that's how Netanyahu is in power. His party, the Likud party, 55% want this war to end. We have seen support in the far-right coalitions for having this war continue. Now that we are starting to see now a majority of people within Netanyahu's own party, that is a really big indicator, I think, about where people are standing in this war.
And Alex, Ruby Khan, who you spoke to, he's been fighting to have his son Itai's body released. You have spoken to him in the past. He has been pretty public about the plight of his son and what his family has gone through. Have you sensed any sort of frustrations that have maybe intensified as this conflict has continued on?
I think intensified is the right word here. They have been frustrated for 2 years at the lack of movement that we have seen really since that first hostage deal in November 2023, some 60 days after that war began, that we saw 200 roughly hostages released. And it has been a slow trickle since. Remember, the majority of the hostages who have been able to go home have been through a peace deal, not through rescue. I believe 8 or so have been rescued. And so the numbers really not on the hostages' side when you're thinking about a rescue mission versus a deal. And Ruby Khan really pushing not only the Israeli government, but also the American government. And that's what he had words about today. He is a U.S. citizen. His son is a U.S. citizen. And he said he asks constantly the White House what the plan B looks like. Because right now he says essentially the White House is using Israel as its proxy to negotiate what happens to the Americans. Itai, his son, Omer Nutra, another IDF soldier, a teenager at the time, serving in the IDF when he was killed on October 7th as well. His body still also has not been recovered. He said, Ruby Khan, his father, told me that he was with Hirsch Goldberg Poland's parents yesterday, and that they're such a prime example of what not having a plan B looks like. Their son executed in a Hamas tunnel because a deal was not made, and they obviously don't want to see that for the rest of the living hostages, but they also want to see their son's remains brought home. Listen.
I got a U.S. passport. I pay taxes in the United States. I would hope that matters for something. They have an obligation to me to get my kid out, regardless of his physical status. And that is my expectation.
And Andrew, we reached out to the White House about this. They responded telling us in part that Trump says that Hamas knows that if they release the remaining hostages, that Hamas will lose their leverages as the hostages are their, quote, shield. As he stated, Trump believes that we will only see the return of the remaining hostages, he says, when Hamas is confronted and destroyed. President Trump made clear the consequences Hamas will face if it continues to hold the hostages, including the bodies of those 2 Americans. This is something Khan had expressed some concern over with me, that essentially he feels the administration is getting in line with the Netanyahu government. That security cabinet in Israel had a meeting today. Israeli media, though, reporting that during that meeting, that hostage deal was not discussed.
All right, national correspondent Alex Miller in New York for us. Alex, thank you for that update. And a double strike on a hospital in the Gaza Strip on Monday by Israeli forces killed at least 20 people, including 5 journalists. The Israeli military today said in a statement that it was targeting what it believed to be Hamas surveillance cameras and that people identified as militants. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called the attack a, quote, tragic mishap. Among those killed was Miriam Daga, a photojournalist who worked for the Associated Press. Scripps News global affairs correspondent Maya Rodriguez is on this story. Maya, what can you tell us about her work and her work specifically in Gaza?
Well, Andrew, Miriam Daga was 33 years old, a mom to her 13-year-old son, and through her work with the Associated Press, she was the eyes and ears on the ground in Gaza for news outlets around the world. Her death and that of the 4 other journalists killed in those Israeli strikes leaves a vacuum in coverage. Now, we want to warn you, this story does contain images that you may find disturbing. Miriam Daga and her camera bore witness to the war in Gaza. Her time often spent documenting the work of doctors at Nasser Hospital in southern Gaza as they tried to save the dying. A fate that would become her own on Monday, when Israeli airstrikes on the hospital killed her and at least 20 people, including 4 other journalists.
As a specialist in conflict photography and a press freedom advocate, this is outrageous, it's enraging, it's infuriating. It is attack after attack on media and press freedom.
Dr. Lauren Walsh is the director of the photojournalism intensive at New York University's Gallatin School. She says the work of journalists like Daga is crucial.
All the journalists, right, photojournalists and all of their colleagues, they are eyewitness, they're providing the eyewitness accounts, they are creating the evidence for what is happening.
Unlike coverage in other war zones, Walsh says the journalists in Gaza, like Miriam Daga, cannot leave.
In Gaza, The journalists are also dealing with starvation, lack of sleep, the death of family members, friends, colleagues, displacement after displacement after displacement. So the intensity of all of it is absolutely enormous.
Recently, Mariam Daga turned her lens to the starvation gripping Gaza and its effect on the children who live there, the subject of the last story she filed before her death.
I think that this is the time where if Western journalists do not robustly stand in solidarity and demanding urgent access to Gaza and continue to report on the West Bank and East Jerusalem, what happens to the Palestinians, they will really have failed their role in this historical moment.
Moments like these that will no longer be captured. One of the reasons that news outlets around the world are so reliant on Palestinian journalists to cover the war is that Israel has banned international independent journalists from entering the Gaza Strip. As it stands right now, all of the reporting coming out of Gaza is being shouldered by the Palestinian journalists who are trapped inside.
We'll be right back with more of today's top stories on Today as It Happened. Welcome back to Today as It Happened. I'm Holly Furfer. Let's jump right back into our rundown of the top stories of the day.
Your English teacher and your gym teacher are getting married. I don't get it, but that's how Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce captioned their engagement photos on Instagram. Yes, that's right, the two are getting hitched. The pair began dating in 2023 and have publicly professed their adoration for each other. And so a big congratulations to Swift and Kelce.
Well, I wish him a lot of luck. No, I think he's a great player. I think he's a great guy, and I think that she's a terrific person. So I wish them a lot of luck.
And a federal judge is tossing out a Trump administration lawsuit that named all 15 Maryland federal judges. The lawsuit had to do with the president's immigration policies and actions. Scripps News legal affairs correspondent Eva-Joy Burnett reporting from our D.C. newsroom. Eva-Joy, this is a judge who was appointed by President Trump in his first term. Why did he rule against the administration?
Hey there, Andrew. Well, this judge's name is Thomas Cullen, and he said this particular lawsuit from the Trump administration against all of the federal judges in Maryland, it is not ordinary. And he said it's, quote, potentially calamitous. He said he understands that there's sometimes tension between the executive branch and the court system. But he said with the Trump administration going after all of these 15 federal judges in Maryland like this departs from long-standing constitutional practices. We just want to backtrack for you here. Earlier this year, there was a chief federal judge in Maryland which blocked the Trump administration from automatically deporting migrants, rapidly doing so because many of these migrants wanted to be able to challenge their deportations in court. This is something that the Trump administration did not like, so they sued all of those 15 federal judges in the state of Maryland. And the administration argued that they wanted to be able to carry out the immigration laws of the land. But then today we got this decision, more than 30 pages from a judge, as you mentioned, who was appointed by President Donald Trump. And we want to show you a portion of what this judge wrote in his more than 30-page opinion earlier today. He said, although some tension between the coordinate branches of government is a hallmark of our constitutional system, this concerted effort by the executive to smear and impugn individual judges who rule against it is both unprecedented and unfortunate. And this judge made it clear that he has seen some of the comments from administration officials calling judges rogue, unhinged, or even crooked. And he made mention of that in his opinion earlier today. I was also able to speak with a law school professor about the possibility of this case making it up to the high court.
I think it's very unlikely that even this Supreme Court, which obviously is very Republican dominated, would entertain this sort of suit by the administration. I think all judges recognize the threat that a suit like this poses for judicial independence. And so I doubt that the Supreme Court would agree to hear this case, even if the Trump administration asked it to.
At this moment, the White House has not commented on this decision that is coming out of the state of Maryland from a judge who was appointed by President Trump in his first term. This particular judge had to come from another state because, once again, all 15 of the federal judges in Maryland were named in this lawsuit. That would have been a conflict of interest if they ruled on this matter. So an outside judge was brought in. And it's not clear if they will appeal this up to the high court, up to the Supreme Court, Andrew.
All right, Scripps News legal affairs correspondent Abijoy Burnett for us. Abijoy, thank you.
We'll be right back to continue our rundown of the day's top stories on Today as It Happened. Welcome back to Today as It Happened, Scripps News debrief of our top stories of the day. So let's get to it.
An influential veterans organization is speaking out after President Trump signed an executive order to create a specialized unit, National Guard. That unit would expand the National Guard role to be more domestic law enforcement focused. Scripps News national security correspondent Liz Landers is following this story. She joins me now in our D.C. newsroom. And Liz, I know you just got off this news conference. What has the reaction been in the first few hours since this was announced?
So this came out yesterday, and we're hearing from organizations like Vet Voice, which is an advocacy group. They're more left-leaning, but they had this call. They had several veterans on the call. They also had a lawyer breaking down their reaction to this executive order from the president and basically saying that they are concerned that this executive order that the president signed yesterday morning continues to chip away at the nonpartisan nature of the military here in the United States. So as we have seen in Washington here in the last 2 weeks or so, the National Guard in D.C., which President Trump oversees, has been deployed around the streets here for beautification efforts and then also to support law enforcement around the district. That's why we are seeing some of these National Guards members carrying weapons now. That has been a change made in the last few days. And in this executive order, this would give additional powers to the Secretary of Defense in 2 areas. And the Vet Voice group, all of these members who are on this call today expressing a lot of concern about what this says. So one of the things that this will do is will give the Secretary of Defense the ability to activate this specialized unit that is dedicated to ensuring public safety and order in the nation's capital. Now, the attorney who joined the call, Liza Gooten, she's a lawyer with the Brennan Center. She said that she is not sure if the president has the authority to do something like this. Listen to how she explained it to us a few minutes ago.
A specialized unit dedicated to ensuring public safety and order would almost by definition be engaging in a law enforcement function. That violates a centuries-old principle against involving the military in domestic policing. The principle is a vital protection for individual liberty and democracy because an army turned inward can be a powerful instrument of tyranny.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening for Today as It Happened. I'm Holly Furfer. Have a great Tuesday night.